The ground is still black where the city once stood. Ash drifts across broken stone, charred beams lie buried beneath layers of collapsed mud brick, and scattered among them are spearheads, shattered shields, fragments of armour, and human bones curled into positions that suggest the final seconds of panic. Somewhere beyond the ruined walls, scavenger birds circle over what used to be farmland, the irrigation canals are clogged, wells are poisoned with debris. The roads leading toward the horizon are empty except for abandoned carts and the bodies of pack animals already beginning to rot beneath the heat of the sun. No triumphant monument remains here. No surviving king records the full truth of what happened, yet the destruction itself tells a story. An army came through this place with such force that an entire society disappeared behind it. For most of human history, armies are remembered through a strange distortion. A handful of famous names survive while thousands of others fade into silence. The ancient world is often imagined as a stage occupied only by Rome, Sparta, Alexander, or perhaps the pharaohs of Egypt. But beneath those familiar stories lies a far larger and more unsettling reality. Long before the modern age, entire civilizations built military systems capable of reshaping continents, destroying cities, moving enormous populations, and altering the course of history in ways still visible today. Some of these armies were astonishingly disciplined, others relied on terror, speed, or endurance. Many were stronger, larger, and more sophisticated than most people realize. What makes these forgotten armies so difficult to fully understand is that much of the evidence survives only in fragments. Ancient kings exaggerated victories. Defeated peoples erased records out of shame or necessity. Time itself destroyed fortresses, weapons, and roads. Even today, archaeologists sometimes uncover entire battlefields accidentally beneath farmland or expanding cities. Scholars still debate the true scale of many ancient conflicts, because the surviving numbers are often impossible. Some chroniclers describe armies of hundreds of thousands marching across deserts or mountains, but no single explanation fully accounts for how such massive forces could survive in environments barely capable of feeding local populations. Yet the exaggerations themselves reveal something important. Ancient people were already living in fear of military power on a scale that seemed almost superhuman. Before armies became permanent institutions, warfare looked very different. Small tribal groups fought over grazing land, water, migration routes, or revenge. Battles were usually short because early societies could not afford prolonged conflict. Most fighters were farmers, hunters, or herders who returned home once the immediate danger passed. Weapons were expensive, armour was rare. Death in battle was personal and chaotic. A single injury could become fatal days later through infection. Even victory often weakened both sides so badly that neither truly recovered. But slowly, something changed. Agriculture created surplus food. Surplus food allowed populations to grow. Larger populations produced more labourers, more craftsmen, and eventually more rulers capable of controlling land far beyond a single village. Walls rose around settlements, granaries appeared, trade routes expanded, and wherever wealth accumulated, organised violence followed close behind. The first true military revolutions did not arrive with iron swords or towering empires. They began with administration. Someone had to count grain, someone had to record taxes, someone had to organise labour for roads and fortifications. The same systems that built irrigation canals could also mobilise men for war. In many ways, the earliest armies were not simply groups of fighters. They were extensions of the state itself. Bureaucracy became as important as weapons. In the river valleys of Mesopotamia, warfare already shows signs of terrifying organisation thousands of years before Rome exists. City-states compete constantly for control of fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Armies march beneath banners displaying symbols of gods and kings. Bronze weapons glint beneath brutal sunlight. Early formations begin appearing in relief carving shield walls, spear ranks, disciplined columns. These are not random mobs charging into battle. They are systems taking shape. One lesser-known detail survives in ancient administrative tablets listing military rations. The records are strangely ordinary: grain allocations, beer supplies, livestock counts. Yet hidden inside these dry accounts is evidence of something enormous. Armies are becoming permanent enough that governments now feed them continuously. Soldiers no longer fight only during emergencies. Warfare itself is becoming an industry. The consequences are catastrophic. Once rulers possess standing armies, they can project power farther than ever before. Villages that once survived by isolation suddenly find themselves exposed to organised campaigns lasting months or years. Captured populations are enslaved. Skilled craftsmen are relocated. Entire communities vanish into forced migration. Ancient warfare is not merely combat between soldiers. It is often the deliberate destruction and reshaping of societies. Archaeology reveals the human cost with disturbing clarity. At several Bronze Age sites, excavators have uncovered skeletons lying unburied inside homes, suggesting attacks so sudden that survivors never returned to perform funerary rites. Some cities show evidence of repeated burning across centuries, destroyed and rebuilt again and again. Children's remains appear alongside weapons and collapsed fortifications. What survives in the record suggests that civilian suffering was not accidental. It was built directly into the logic of conquest. And still the armies grow. As metallurgy improves, weapons become deadlier and more accessible. Bronze spearheads spread across trade networks stretching hundreds of miles. Chariots emerge as symbols of elite military power. Horses transform communication and mobility. Fortifications become more sophisticated in response. Thick defensive walls rise around cities with angled gates designed to slow attackers. Towers overlook narrow approaches. Moats appear in some regions. Warfare evolves into a constant contest between offensive innovation and desperate defense. Yet strength in the ancient world is never simply about battlefield skill. The strongest armies are usually the ones capable of surviving logistics, climate, and distance. A force that cannot eat dies long before reaching battle. Armies marching through dry regions must secure water constantly. Campaigns collapse because of disease more often than swords. Ancient commanders understand this with brutal clarity. Some avoid battle entirely, choosing instead to starve enemies into surrender. Even at this early stage, psychological warfare becomes central. Kings carve reliefs showing defeated enemies flayed alive or impaled outside conquered cities. The purpose is obvious. Terror can destroy resistance before armies even arrive. Fear itself becomes a weapon. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the deeper one looks into the ancient world, the stranger and more unsettling these armies become. The familiar image of primitive warfare quickly disappears. Many early military societies already understand engineering, supply chains, reconnaissance, propaganda, diplomacy, and strategic planning on levels surprisingly advanced for their time. Some armies travel astonishing distances across terrain modern vehicles would struggle to cross. Others maintain discipline under conditions of heat, cold, hunger, and exhaustion that seem almost impossible. And behind every marching column lies the same fragile truth. Armies do not emerge from nowhere. They are reflections of the civilizations that create them. Every spear, road, fortress, and formation is tied to systems of labor, belief, fear, and survival. The rise of powerful armies is inseparable from the rise of organized civilization itself, which means the story of ancient warfare is not only about conquest, it is also the story of humanity learning how to organize destruction on a scale the world had never seen before. By the time the sun rises over the valleys of Laconia, the boys are already awake, barefoot in the cold dust. They move through drills without speaking. Their hair is cut short. Their food is intentionally scarce. Hunger follows them constantly, not as punishment but as instruction. They are taught to steal, but beaten if caught, because the lesson is not morality. The lesson is competence. Pain becomes ordinary early in life, so does obedience. Far beyond the olive groves and dry hills surrounding Sparta, later generations will transform this society into legend. Stories of fearless warriors standing against impossible odds spread across the ancient world and survive into the modern imagination. Yet the reality beneath the myth is stranger, harsher, and far more systematic than the heroic image usually presented. Sparta is not merely a city with strong soldiers. It's an entire civilization reorganized around permanent military readiness. What makes Sparta so unsettling is not simply battlefield skill. Other ancient states field larger armies, richer armies, or more technologically advanced armies. Sparta's true strength comes from social engineering so extreme that almost every aspect of life exists to support war. The army is not separate from society. The army is society. The origins of this system remain partly obscured. Scholars still debate exactly how Sparta developed into such an aggressively militarized state. What survives in the historical record suggests a gradual transformation driven by conquest and fear. Early Spartan expansion across the Peloponnese creates a dangerous imbalance. The Spartans conquer neighbouring populations known as helots, reducing them to a form of state servitude. These labourers farm the land, produce food, and sustain the Spartan economy, but they vastly outnumber the Spartan ruling class itself. This creates a terrifying problem. Sparta becomes powerful and deeply vulnerable at the same time. Every military campaign risks rebellion at home. Every earthquake, famine, or political crisis threatens uprising from below. The entire Spartan military system evolves partly from this permanent fear. Unlike many ancient societies where soldiers fight seasonally, Sparta begins training for war almost continuously. Boys enter the agoge, the state education system, at an early age. Conditions are deliberately severe. Clothing is limited. Comfort is discouraged. Endurance becomes a form of identity. Ancient writers describe young Spartans sleeping on reeds gathered by hand from riverbanks. They fight each other constantly in controlled competitions designed to encourage aggression and resilience. Some later accounts exaggerate Spartan discipline into near superhuman levels, and the evidence remains incomplete in places, but even cautious historians agree the system is unusually intense for the ancient world. Spartan citizens are conditioned to suppress individuality in favour of collective survival. Speech becomes brief and controlled, emotional restraint is admired. Public shame is weaponized against cowardice. Yet the famous Spartan warriors represent only a small fraction of the population. This is one of the least understood aspects of Spartan power. The full military system depends on invisible labour beneath it. Helots grow the food, craftsmen produce weapons and armour. Non-citizen populations handle trade and economic functions many Spartans deliberately avoid. The image of the pure warrior society survives partly because so much of its foundation is hidden. On the battlefield, however, the effect is undeniable. The core of Spartan strength lies in the phalanx, a dense infantry formation built around discipline and cohesion. Each soldier carries a large round shield, overlapping with the shields of others to create a moving wall of bronze and wood. Long spears project outward in tightly packed ranks. The formation advances steadily, slowly compressing enemy lines through weight, pressure, and terrifying unity. Ancient warfare is often chaotic once battle begins. Dust clouds reduce visibility, orders become difficult to hear, fear spreads quickly. Many armies break formation under stress, turning organised combat into scattered violence. Spartan training attempts to eliminate precisely this weakness. Their formations move with extraordinary coordination compared to many rivals. One lesser-known detail involves music. Spartan armies sometimes advance to the sound of flutes, maintaining rhythm and order as they approach enemy lines. The effect is psychologically disturbing. Rather than charging wildly, the Spartans move calmly, almost mechanically toward collision. Ancient observers repeatedly comment on the unnerving silence and discipline of these formations. The Battle of Thermopylae eventually becomes the defining symbol of Spartan reputation, but the later legend often obscures the broader reality. The famous stand against Persia is not simply a tale of heroic sacrifice, it is also propaganda, politics, and strategic theatre intertwined. The Spartan king Leonidas leads only a relatively small force, supported by allies whose contributions are frequently minimised in later retellings. The battle delays Persian advance temporarily. But militarily it is not a decisive victory. Its real power lies elsewhere. The story transforms Sparta into an idea larger than the city itself. Discipline against overwhelming odds, order against chaos, courage against annihilation. Later cultures repeatedly reshape the event to match their own values. Yet stripped of mythology, the battle also reveals the brutal efficiency of the Spartan system. These soldiers are capable of enduring conditions that would shatter many other armies. Still, Sparta's military dominance contains fatal weaknesses from the beginning. Its population of full Spartan citizens remains dangerously small. The system demands such extreme standards that citizenship becomes increasingly exclusive over time. Military losses are difficult to replace. Wealth inequality slowly grows even inside Spartan society. Meanwhile, rivals adapt. Other Greek states learn from Spartan tactics while developing more flexible political and military structures. The Spartan obsession with stability also limits innovation. Their conservatism becomes both strength and weakness. While other societies expand economically, experiment culturally, and adapt strategically, Sparta clings to rigid traditions. What once creates military superiority eventually slows their ability to respond to changing realities. There is another contradiction buried deep inside Spartan identity. Although remembered primarily as fearless warriors, the Spartans spend enormous energy trying to avoid internal collapse. The fear of helot revolt shapes policy constantly. Some ancient sources describe secret campaigns of intimidation and assassination directed against potentially rebellious populations. Scholars debate the reliability of certain accounts, but evidence strongly suggests that state violence against helots is systematic and severe. In this sense, Sparta's military machine is built not only for conquest abroad, but for control at home. The disciplined warrior culture admired by later generations emerges from an environment saturated with anxiety, and yet the reputation endures. Centuries later, long after Sparta's decline, other civilizations continue studying its methods. Roman writers admire Spartan endurance. Military reformers reference Spartan discipline. Modern popular culture transforms the city into a symbol of martial perfection, often stripping away the darker realities beneath the image. But the deeper truth is more complicated. Sparta is powerful not because its people are naturally superior fighters, but because an entire society sacrifices comfort, freedom, individuality, and flexibility in pursuit of military efficiency. The system produces astonishing soldiers. It also produces fragility hidden beneath the surface, because no army, no matter how disciplined, can escape the pressures of time forever. And beyond the mountains of Greece, an empire is already rising whose armies will dwarf anything the Spartans have ever faced. The dust appears first. From the walls of the frontier cities, observers see it spreading across the horizon in immense pale clouds that blur the boundary between earth and sky. Then come the sounds, thousands of hooves, wagon wheels grinding against dry ground, shouted commands echoing through columns too large to fully comprehend from a distance. Banners ripple above the advancing mass. Sunlight flashes across spear points and scale armour. Somewhere inside that moving expanse are archers from the Iranian plateau. Cavalry from Central Asia, engineers from Mesopotamia, sailors from Phoenicia, and infantry drawn from lands separated by deserts, mountains, rivers, and languages. To many ancient observers, the armies of Persia seem almost limitless. The Achaemenid Empire rises with astonishing speed during the 6th century BCE. Within a relatively short period, Persian rulers create the largest empire the world has yet seen, stretching from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean. Entire kingdoms disappear beneath its expansion. Ancient roads fill with imperial couriers. Tribute flows toward royal capitals from territories so distant that many subjects will never even see the king they serve. Yet what makes Persian military power remarkable is not simply size, it is organisation across unimaginable distance. Most ancient states struggle to project force beyond nearby regions. Armies move slowly, communication breaks down, supply systems collapse. But Persia develops administrative networks capable of coordinating enormous campaigns across thousands of miles. The empire is divided into provinces called satrapies, each responsible for taxation, local administration, and military obligations. Roads connect major cities with way stations, allowing messages and supplies to move at unprecedented speed. One Greek observer later marvels that neither snow, rain, heat, nor darkness stops Persian royal couriers from completing their routes. The statement becomes famous centuries later in altered form, but its origin reflects genuine astonishment at Persian logistical capability, because logistics, not battlefield heroics, form the true backbone of Persian strength. The empire's armies are often portrayed in simplistic ways by later Greek and Roman writers, eager to emphasize their own victories. Persian soldiers are sometimes described as soft, overly luxurious, or lacking discipline compared to hardened Greek hoplites, but archaeology and modern scholarship paint a far more complex picture. Persian military systems are sophisticated, adaptable, and deeply practical. Rather than relying on a single ethnic core, the empire absorbs military traditions from conquered peoples. This creates astonishing diversity inside Persian armies. Some units specialize in mounted archery, others fight with spears, shields, or javelins. Engineers construct bridges, siege ramps, and fortified camps. Naval forces operate across the eastern Mediterranean using expertise inherited partly from Phoenician sailors. The famous immortals become the symbolic center of Persian military prestige. Ancient sources describe them as an elite force of 10,000 soldiers whose numbers are constantly replenished, giving the impression they can never diminish. Scholars still debate how literal this description truly is, but the psychological effect matters. The name itself suggests permanence, stability, endless imperial power, and appearance matters enormously in ancient warfare. Persian armies understand spectacle. Rich fabrics, gold ornaments, decorated armour, and massive ceremonial displays reinforce the image of imperial authority. To enemies watching from city walls, these armies do not merely represent military invasion. They represent the arrival of a world-spanning empire with resources seemingly beyond measure. But beneath the grandeur lies ruthless calculation. Campaigns require staggering quantities of food and water. Ancient armies consume resources at terrifying speed. Tens of thousands of soldiers, pack animals, horses, and camp followers moving through dry landscapes can devastate entire regions simply by passing through. Persian planners therefore rely heavily on preparation. Supply depots are established. River routes are utilised whenever possible. Grain shipments move ahead of advancing forces. What survives in the record suggests Persian rulers understand that endurance wins wars more reliably than glory. The empire also excels at something many rivals underestimate: flexibility. Persian commanders are often willing to negotiate, bribe, divide enemies politically, or exploit local rivalries instead of relying solely on direct military conquest. Some regions submit with relatively little resistance because the empire allows substantial local autonomy in exchange for tribute and loyalty. This adaptability becomes one reason the empire expands so successfully. Persia does not attempt to erase every conquered culture. It governs through layered control, balancing intimidation with pragmatism. Still, the scale of Persian campaigns creates enormous risks. The invasion of Greece under Xerxes remains one of the most ambitious military operations of the ancient world. Bridges are reportedly constructed across the Hellespont to move troops between Asia and Europe. Canals are dug through difficult terrain. Supply chains stretch across vast distances. Ancient chroniclers provide numbers for the invading force so enormous that modern historians remain deeply sceptical. Some ancient accounts claim millions participate, though the evidence strongly suggests much smaller totals. Even reduced estimates, however, remain extraordinary for the time. The campaign reveals both the power and vulnerability of massive ancient armies. Large forces can overwhelm regions through sheer scale, but they also become difficult to feed, coordinate, and maneuver. Narrow terrain reduces numerical advantages. Delays become dangerous. Communication weakens over distance. This tension appears dramatically during battles against Greek coalitions at Thermopylae. Persian numbers eventually overcome resistance through maneuver and persistence rather than simple frontal assault alone. At Salamis, however, the empire's naval advantage is constrained by geography. Greek forces exploit tighter waters where Persian fleet coordination becomes more difficult. No single explanation fully accounts for every Persian defeat described in Greek sources, because many surviving accounts are heavily biased towards celebrating Greek resilience. Persian setbacks are real, but so is the broader reality that the empire survives and remains immensely powerful long afterward. In fact, Persia's ability to recover repeatedly after military reverses may be its most underestimated strength. Many ancient states collapse after major defeat. Persia absorbs losses, reorganizes, and continues functioning because its administrative foundation remains intact. Roads still operate, provinces still collect tribute, garrisons still maintain order, imperial systems outlive individual disasters. There is also another overlooked aspect of Persian military power tolerance within diversity. Soldiers from different regions serve together under imperial command not because they share identical culture or language, but because the empire creates structures capable of holding vast differences together temporarily through incentives, hierarchy, and force. This makes Persian armies feel strangely modern in some respects. Yet beneath the organisation lies an unavoidable problem that haunts every enormous empire. The larger the territory becomes, the harder it is to maintain unity. Local revolts erupt periodically, satraps accumulate independent influence, succession struggles weaken central authority, distance itself becomes an enemy, and waiting beyond the western frontier is a smaller kingdom many Persians barely consider significant at first, Macedon. A rough northern land whose king is about to inherit military ideas from both Greece and Persia, reshape them into something devastatingly efficient, and unleash an army that will overturn the balance of the ancient world with shocking speed. At dawn, the Roman camp is already awake. Rows of leather tents stand in perfect order behind defensive trenches carved into the earth the previous evening. Fires burn low beneath iron cooking pots. Armour is inspected carefully in the half-light. Mules shift beneath the weight of tools, grain, and spare equipment. Surveyors measure distances. Officers review marching formations. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, scouts move through forests and hills searching for signs of enemy movement. To outsiders, the Roman army often appears defined by a single-image disciplined legionaries advancing beneath red standards with shields locked together. That image survives because it contains truth. Roman infantry discipline becomes legendary for good reason, yet the real strength of Rome lies elsewhere. The legion itself is only the visible surface of a much larger machine. What makes Roman armies stronger than most people realise is not merely battlefield performance, it is the astonishing system supporting them. By the height of Roman expansion, the empire fields military forces across enormous distances, from the cold rain of Britain to the deserts of Syria. Armies guard mountain passes, patrol rivers, suppress rebellions, escort officials, build roads, and defend borders stretching thousands of miles. Maintaining this network requires more than courage or tactical skill. It requires organisation on a scale ancient societies rarely achieve consistently. The Roman army evolves gradually through centuries of warfare. Early Rome fights as a relatively small regional power surrounded by rivals. Defeats shape its development as much as victories. This becomes one of Rome's defining advantages. Unlike many states that collapse after disaster, Rome repeatedly adapts. The Roman military system absorbs lessons constantly. Equipment changes, formations evolve, recruitment expands, command structures become more flexible. Defeat is treated not as proof of weakness, but as information. One lesser-known detail reveals this mindset clearly. Roman soldiers are expected to carry heavy tools in addition to weapons. Ancient writers mock them as Marius's mules because of the enormous loads they transport during marches. Yet this burden gives Roman armies extraordinary independence. Soldiers can rapidly build camps, roads, bridges, and fortifications without relying entirely on local resources. Every evening during campaign season, Roman forces often construct fortified camps even when stopping only briefly. Trenches are dug, stakes are placed, defensive walls rise with astonishing speed. The routine is exhausting, but it dramatically reduces vulnerability to surprise attacks. This obsession with engineering changes warfare. Roman armies do not merely move through landscapes, they reshape them. Roads slice across forests and mountains. Bridges span rivers previously considered major barriers. Siege works surround enemy cities with terrifying efficiency. During some campaigns, Roman engineers construct walls not only around besieged settlements, but also facing outward to protect against relieving armies. At the Siege of Alesia, Julius Caesar's forces build massive double fortification lines encircling both the trapped Gauls and the external forces attempting rescue. The scale of the project remains staggering even by modern standards. Trenches, towers, traps, and ramparts spread across miles of terrain. The Roman army effectively turns engineering into a weapon equal to the sword, but Rome's military strength depends on far more than Roman citizens alone. This is another reality often overlooked in popular imagination. By the imperial period, auxiliary troops from across the empire become essential to Roman success. Cavalry from Gaul, archers from Syria, slingers from the Balearic Islands, light infantry from North Africa, and scouts from frontier tribes all serve alongside legionaries. Many possess specialized skills Romans themselves lack. In some regions, auxiliaries may even outnumber the legions. The Roman army therefore functions partly as an imperial coalition held together through pay, citizenship incentives, discipline, and political control. Service in auxiliary units can eventually grant citizenship, binding conquered peoples directly into Roman expansion. What begins as military necessity slowly becomes a tool of integration. Still, Roman discipline remains central. Punishments inside the army are severe. Desertion, cowardice, or insubordination can lead to execution. One infamous practice, decimation, involves killing 1 out of every 10 men in disgraced units by lottery. Scholars debate how often this punishment is truly used, but the fact that Romans preserve stories about it reveals the culture surrounding military obedience. Yet discipline alone does not explain Roman endurance. The Republic and later Empire possess a remarkable ability to replace losses. During wars against Carthage, Rome suffers catastrophes that would destroy many states entirely. Entire armies are annihilated. Tens of thousands die in single battles. At Cannae, Hannibal inflicts one of the worst defeats in Roman history. Ancient accounts describe fields covered so densely with bodies that movement becomes difficult, and still Rome continues fighting. This resilience shocks its enemies repeatedly. The Roman state can mobilize manpower at extraordinary scale because its political and social structures distribute military obligation widely. Allies are required to contribute troops. Roads facilitate movement. Administrative systems support taxation and supply. Hannibal eventually realizes something terrifying. Winning battles is not enough. Rome's strength lies in persistence. Even Roman battlefield tactics reflect this broader mentality. Legion formations are designed for flexibility compared to many older systems. Units can maneuver independently, rotate exhausted soldiers, and adapt more easily to changing conditions. Commanders often emphasize endurance over reckless heroism. Roman warfare becomes a contest of sustained pressure. The psychological impact of this system spreads across the ancient world. Enemies encounter armies capable not only of defeating them, but of returning repeatedly year after year with fresh troops, rebuilt infrastructure, and renewed determination. Resistance becomes exhausting. Yet the Roman military machine carries hidden weaknesses from the beginning. Expansion creates dependency on continuous conquest. Victorious campaigns provide wealth, slaves, and political prestige. Successful generals accumulate enormous influence. Armies increasingly become loyal to commanders rather than the state itself. Civil wars erupt. Ambitious leaders march Roman armies against Rome. There is also the problem of scale. Borders stretch farther every generation. Garrisons become expensive. Frontier pressures intensify. Recruitment grows more difficult in some regions. Corruption spreads through supply systems and administration. And then there are the soldiers themselves. Life inside the Roman army is brutal. Marches are punishing. Disease spreads rapidly through camps. Injuries linger for years. Veterans often carry permanent scars, damaged joints, or chronic illness long after service ends. Archaeological evidence from military cemeteries reveals widespread arthritis, healed fractures, and physical trauma consistent with relentless labour as much as combat. The Roman army survives because it transforms suffering into structure. Everything is regulated: equipment standards, camp layouts, training routines, punishments, promotions, logistics. Rome attempts to reduce the chaos of warfare through systems so methodical they continue influencing military organisation thousands of years later. But no army remains invincible forever. Beyond Rome's borders, other powers are learning. Some adapt Roman methods. Others develop entirely different forms of warfare built around speed, mobility, and unpredictability. And among Rome's deadliest enemies rises a commander whose army seems capable of turning Roman strengths against them. A man leading elephants across mountains, a strategist who understands that discipline alone cannot save an empire from fear. The first thing the Romans notice is the silence. Snow presses against the slopes of the Alps in pale, windswept layers. The mountain paths are narrow, unstable, and half hidden beneath ice. Pack animals stumble over loose stone. Men disappear into ravines without sound. Somewhere ahead, beyond ridges wrapped in cloud, enemy tribes wait among the heights watching the slow movement below. The crossing should be impossible. No major army is expected to come this way, especially not one carrying cavalry, siege equipment, and enormous animals dragged from distant Africa. And yet the army keeps moving. Long before Hannibal ever reaches Italy, fear begins spreading through the Roman world. Reports arrive confused and contradictory. Cities fall in Spain. Roman fleets suffer setbacks. Scouts vanish. Then comes the unimaginable rumour that a Carthaginian commander is attempting to cross the Alps with war elephants. Even for hardened Roman officials, the idea sounds absurd. That is partly why it works. Hannibal Barca emerges from one of Rome's most dangerous rivals, the wealthy maritime power of Carthage. Founded originally by Phoenician settlers from the eastern Mediterranean, Carthage builds influence through trade, naval dominance, and strategic colonies stretching across North Africa, Spain, and islands of the western Mediterranean. Unlike Rome, whose strength increasingly depends on massive citizen armies and territorial expansion, Carthage operates through commerce, diplomacy, and flexible military organisation. Its armies are remarkably diverse. Iberian swordsmen, Numidian cavalry, Balearic slingers, Celtic warriors, African infantry, and mercenaries from multiple cultures fight together under Carthaginian command. Later, Roman writers sometimes portray this diversity as weakness, suggesting mercenary forces lack loyalty, but Hannibal turns diversity into tactical advantage. He understands adaptation better than many of his enemies. The Second Punic War begins as a struggle for influence, trade, and survival between two expanding powers increasingly unable to coexist peacefully. Rome expects conflict mainly in Spain and along traditional fronts. Instead, Hannibal chooses something radically dangerous. He attacks Roman assumptions themselves. The Alpine crossing becomes one of the most famous military operations in ancient history, though many details remain uncertain. Scholars still debate the exact route. Ancient accounts differ dramatically regarding troop numbers, weather conditions, and casualties, but the broad reality is clear enough. Hannibal forces a large multinational army across terrain so severe that even modern travellers struggle through some sections safely. The losses are catastrophic. Men freeze to death, horses fall from cliffs, supply animals disappear into snow and mud, local tribes ambush vulnerable columns. Some ancient descriptions may exaggerate the suffering for dramatic effect, but archaeology and geography confirm the crossing is genuinely brutal, and yet enough survive. That survival matters more than the precise numbers. When Hannibal descends into northern Italy, he achieves something psychologically devastating. He appears where Rome least expects him. The Roman military machine, so dependent on preparation and structure, suddenly faces an enemy willing to gamble on movements considered nearly impossible. This becomes the defining feature of Hannibal's campaigns. He studies Roman behaviour carefully and exploits predictability. Roman commanders often prefer direct engagement and decisive confrontation. Hannibal prefers manipulation. He shapes terrain, timing, and perception. Battles become traps. At Trebia, Roman forces are drawn across freezing water before combat begins, weakening them physically before the main engagement even develops. At Lake Trasimene, Hannibal conceals troops within fog-covered hills surrounding a narrow route beside the lake. Roman forces march directly into ambush. Thousands die in confusion before understanding the scale of the disaster. But it is Cannae that transforms Hannibal into legend. The battlefield lies in southern Italy beneath oppressive summer heat. Dust rises constantly beneath thousands of marching feet. Roman commanders believe superior numbers will finally crush Hannibal's army through sheer pressure. The Roman formation pushes aggressively forward, compressing against the Carthaginian centre. This is precisely what Hannibal wants. His lines gradually bend inward, creating the illusion of weakness. Roman troops surge deeper into the formation, packed so tightly many can barely use weapons effectively. Then the Carthaginian flanks close around them. Cavalry strikes from behind. The Roman army becomes trapped inside its own momentum. What follows is slaughter. Ancient casualty figures may be inflated, as often happens in ancient warfare, but even conservative estimates describe one of the deadliest single-day defeats Rome ever suffers. Thousands suffocate, are crushed, or cut down inside the encirclement. Some later accounts describe blood soaking the ground deeply enough to stain equipment and sandals long afterward. Cannae becomes a masterpiece studied by military strategists for centuries because it demonstrates something terrifying. Tactical brilliance can overcome even overwhelming numerical disadvantage. Yet Hannibal's greatest strength is not merely battlefield genius, it is endurance. For years, he campaigns deep inside hostile territory far from reliable reinforcement. His army survives through alliances, mobility, local support, and constant adaptation. He repeatedly defeats Roman forces that are often larger and better supplied, and still Rome refuses to surrender. This becomes the central tragedy of Hannibal's campaign. He wins battle after battle but cannot fully break the Roman system. Many Italian allies hesitate to abandon Rome permanently. Carthage itself provides inconsistent support. Reinforcements arrive too slowly or not at all. Siege equipment remains limited. Rome absorbs losses that should destroy lesser states. The evidence remains incomplete regarding exactly why Carthage fails to capitalise fully on Hannibal's victories. Some historians argue political divisions within Carthage undermine the campaign, others emphasise logistical impossibility. No single explanation fully accounts for the outcome, but gradually the strategic balance shifts. Rome avoids direct large-scale confrontations when possible. Instead, it attacks Hannibal's support networks, pressures Carthaginian territories elsewhere, and relies on long-term attrition. The Roman general Fabius adopts delaying tactics so cautious that many Romans initially despise them, yet time itself slowly becomes Rome's ally. Meanwhile, Hannibal's army changes. Veterans die and cannot always be replaced with equal quality. Local alliances weaken. Supplies become uncertain. The psychological strain of endless campaigning deep inside enemy territory grows heavier each year. There is another overlooked reality beneath the famous victories. Hannibal's army functions because different cultures cooperate under extreme conditions despite language barriers, varied traditions, and uneven loyalties. Commanders coordinate cavalry from North Africa with Iberian infantry and Celtic warriors whose fighting styles differ dramatically. Maintaining cohesion under such circumstances requires extraordinary leadership. That cohesion survives far longer than many ancient observers would have believed possible, and yet even Hannibal cannot escape the deeper mathematics of empire. Rome controls greater manpower reserves, greater agricultural output, greater capacity for replacement. The Roman system bends but does not fully break. Eventually the war shifts toward Africa itself. Hannibal is recalled home after years in Italy, at Zama. Roman forces under Scipio Africanus defeat Carthage decisively. The balance of power in the Mediterranean changes permanently, but the memory of Hannibal never disappears. Roman writers continue studying him long after his death. Military leaders centuries later still analyse Cannae with fascination and unease, because Hannibal exposes a truth every great empire fears. Even the strongest military machine can be outmanoeuvred, and farther east, another empire has already begun perfecting methods of warfare built not merely around tactical brilliance, but around terror so systematic that entire cities surrender before battle even begins. The Assyrians are coming. The city knows they are coming long before the army arrives. Smoke appears first along the horizon where farms and villages once stood. Refugees stagger toward the gates carrying children, broken tools, and stories too brutal to fully repeat. Traders vanish from the roads. Wells outside the walls are poisoned or buried. Then scouts report the sound of drums and the movement of siege engines dragged slowly across the plains behind advancing infantry columns. For the defenders watching from above, the worst part is uncertainty. Because the Assyrians do not simply conquer cities, they make examples of them. At the height of their power, the Neo-Assyrian Empire becomes one of the most feared military states of the ancient world. From their heartland in northern Mesopotamia, Assyrian kings expand outward through relentless campaigns that reshape the political map of the Near East. Kingdom after kingdom falls beneath their armies. Ancient capitals burn. Entire populations are deported across enormous distances. Rebellion becomes synonymous with catastrophe. Later empires inherit many Assyrian military techniques, but the Assyrians often reach these methods centuries earlier than their rivals. What makes them stronger than most people realize is not only battlefield effectiveness, but their ability to integrate technology, engineering, administration, and psychological warfare into a unified system of conquest. The Assyrian army is not improvised, it is highly organized, increasingly professional, and constantly active. Earlier states often rely heavily on seasonal levies tied to agriculture, but Assyria maintains standing military forces capable of rapid deployment. Kings campaign almost every year. Warfare becomes the engine of the empire itself. This creates a cycle both powerful and dangerous. Expansion feeds the empire with tribute, labour, resources, and prestige. Success strengthens royal authority, but failure threatens instability. Assyrian rulers therefore pursue military dominance with relentless intensity because the empire's survival depends upon it. One lesser-known detail survives in palace reliefs carved into stone walls inside royal capitals like Nineveh and Nimrud. These scenes are astonishingly detailed. Soldiers swim rivers using inflated animal skins. Engineers dismantle fortifications. Archers fire in coordinated formations while shield-bearers protect them from return volleys. Siege towers roll towards city walls beneath covering fire. The reliefs are propaganda, certainly. But they are also technical records revealing a military culture obsessed with practical warfare. The Assyrians understand something many rivals learn: too late cities are the key to power. As urban societies grow richer and more fortified, siege warfare becomes increasingly important. Open battles remain dangerous and unpredictable. Fortified cities, however, contain food stores, political authority, trade routes, and symbolic legitimacy. Taking them means controlling entire regions, so the Assyrians become masters of siegecraft. Their armies arrive equipped not only with weapons but with specialists. Engineers build ramps against walls using earth, timber, and stone. Sappers tunnel beneath foundations attempting to collapse defences from below. Archers suppress defenders on the battlements while battering rams, hammer gates relentlessly. Some reliefs even depict primitive armoured coverings protecting siege crews from missiles and fire. For defenders trapped inside ancient cities, siege warfare is psychological torment stretched across weeks or months. Food dwindles slowly, disease spreads through crowded streets, water becomes contaminated, fires break out, morale collapses under exhaustion and fear, and the Assyrians intentionally intensify that fear. Royal inscriptions describe defeated enemies impaled, flayed, or displayed publicly after rebellion. Modern readers sometimes assume these accounts are exaggerated symbolism, and certainly ancient rulers often dramatise victories. Yet archaeological evidence and cross-cultural records strongly suggest Assyrian violence is genuinely systematic and deliberately theatrical. This is not cruelty without purpose, it is strategy. The empire uses terror to reduce future resistance. If neighbouring cities believe defiance leads to annihilation, surrender becomes more attractive. In some cases, entire regions submit before major battles even occur, because Assyrian reputation alone is enough to break opposition psychologically. What survives in the record suggests the empire understands propaganda at an extraordinarily advanced level. Relief carvings, inscriptions, royal ceremonies, and public punishments all reinforce the same message: resistance is hopeless. Yet beneath the brutality lies remarkable sophistication. The Assyrians maintain extensive road systems and communication networks, allowing rapid movement of troops and information. Provincial governors manage taxation and local security. Conquered populations are often deported strategically, rather than simply exterminated. Skilled craftsmen, scribes, metalworkers, and labourers are relocated throughout the empire where their expertise benefits Assyrian infrastructure and economy. These forced migrations are devastating on a human level. Entire communities lose ancestral lands, religious centres, and social stability. But from the imperial perspective, deportation weakens rebellion while redistributing labour efficiently. In this sense, Assyrian warfare extends far beyond battlefields. It reorganises populations themselves. The military also benefits from technological adaptation. Iron weapons become increasingly widespread during Assyria's rise. Iron is not automatically superior in every situation to bronze, but larger supplies eventually allow more standardised production of weapons and tools. Assyrian armies field large numbers of heavily armed infantry supported by cavalry and chariots. The evolution of cavalry proves especially important. Earlier Near Eastern warfare often relies heavily on chariots as elite mobile platforms, but cavalry gradually becomes more flexible and effective in many environments. Assyrian armies help accelerate this transition. Mounted troops improve reconnaissance, communication, and rapid pursuit of fleeing enemies. There is another reason Assyria becomes so dangerous: experience. Because the empire campaigns constantly, its soldiers and commanders accumulate practical knowledge generation after generation. Techniques are refined through repeated warfare across deserts, mountains, forests, and river valleys. Assyrian armies learn how different enemies fight and adapt accordingly. Some campaigns push deep into difficult terrain against tribal groups using guerrilla tactics. Others involve massive sieges against wealthy urban centres. The military system becomes versatile through repetition, and yet the empire's greatest strength slowly becomes its weakness. Continuous expansion creates overstretch. Maintaining distant territories drains resources. Subject peoples resent taxation, deportation, and imperial violence. Rival powers study Assyrian methods and begin adapting them for themselves. Meanwhile, the Empire's reputation for invincibility creates dangerous expectations internally. Kings must keep winning. Military failure becomes politically catastrophic. The evidence remains incomplete regarding the precise sequence of Assyria's final collapse because surviving records become fragmented during the Empire's last decades. But the broader pattern is clear enough. Rebellions intensify. External enemies coordinate attacks. Civil conflict weakens central authority. Then, astonishingly quickly, the Empire falls apart. The destruction of Nineveh in 612 BCE shocks the ancient world. One of history's most terrifying military powers collapses into fire, ruin, and silence. The great palaces burn, statues shatter, administrative systems disintegrate. For centuries afterward, the locations of some Assyrian capitals are forgotten beneath layers of dust and earth. But their influence survives. Future empires inherit Assyrian ideas about administration, siegecraft, terror, logistics, and imperial warfare. The methods spread long after the empire itself disappears, because ancient military history is rarely a story of isolated civilizations. It's a chain of adaptation. Each army studies the strengths and failures of those that came before. And beyond the settled empires, beyond the cities and stone walls, another kind of military power is emerging across the grasslands of the Eurasian steppe. Faster than any marching infantry, harder to predict than any empire, armies carried not by roads, but by horses. The riders appear without warning. One moment the horizon is empty except for endless grass moving beneath cold wind. Then dark shapes emerge in the distance, scattered at first, almost indistinguishable from drifting animals. Within minutes they are everywhere. Horses thunder across the plain in loose formations impossible to predict. Arrows begin falling before defenders can properly organize themselves. By the time infantry attempt to form ranks, the attackers have already changed direction, vanishing outward into open space only to circle back again from another angle. To settled civilizations watching from behind walls and farmland, the armies of the steppe often seem less like human forces and more like natural disasters. For thousands of years, the great grasslands stretching across Eurasia produced societies built around mobility, endurance, and adaptation to harsh environments. These landscapes are immense beyond easy comprehension. From Eastern Europe through Central Asia toward Mongolia, the steppe forms a connected ecological corridor where survival depends on movement. Winters are brutal, distances are enormous, permanent cities remain relatively rare across many regions. Herd animals become wealth. Transportation and survival itself. Out of these conditions emerge military cultures unlike those of sedentary empires. Most agricultural civilizations organize warfare around fortified centers, supply depots, roads, and concentrated manpower. Steppe societies operate differently. Their strength comes from speed. Riders can travel astonishing distances carrying minimal equipment while living partly off their herds. Entire communities remain mobile. Knowledge of terrain passes across generations. Children learn riding early because horses are woven directly into everyday life. This creates soldiers whose mobility shocks settled armies repeatedly. The Scythians become among the earliest steppe peoples to terrify major civilizations on a large scale. Ancient Greek writers describe them with fascination and unease. They are expert mounted archers capable of firing accurately while riding at high speed. Their tactics rely heavily on maneuver, harassment, and controlled retreat rather than rigid formation battles. One lesser-known detail survives in archaeological discoveries from frozen burial mounds across Central Asia. Some graves contain remarkably preserved clothing, tattoos, horse gear, and weapons. These finds reveal sophisticated craftsmanship and complex social organization beneath the stereotype of barbarian nomads. Steppe warriors are not primitive raiders wandering aimlessly. Many belong to highly adaptive cultures deeply skilled in animal husbandry, warfare, and long-distance movement. The horse changes everything. Before widespread cavalry warfare, most armies move at the pace of marching infantry and supply wagons. Mounted troops exist in many societies, but steppe peoples build entire military systems around horseback mobility. Riders can scout vast territory quickly, strike supply lines, surround slower enemies, and retreat before heavy infantry can respond effectively. This creates enormous psychological pressure. Sedentary armies prefer predictable engagements where formations, fortifications, and logistics can be controlled. Steppe warfare undermines those assumptions constantly. There may be no decisive battle at all. Instead, defenders endure endless raids, disappearing enemies, destroyed crops, stolen livestock, and communication breakdowns. And then there is the tactic many settled armies find hardest to counter: the feigned retreat. Steppe cavalry intentionally withdraws during battle, luring enemies into pursuit. Once formations break apart, riders reverse direction suddenly, surrounding isolated forces with arrows and rapid strikes. The maneuver requires extraordinary discipline and coordination. Poorly executed retreats become genuine collapse. But experienced steppe armies perform these movements with terrifying precision. The Parthians later demonstrate this repeatedly against Rome. At the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE, Roman forces under Crassus marched deep into unfamiliar territory, expecting conventional confrontation. Instead, they encounter highly mobile Parthian cavalry, combining armoured lancers with mounted archers. Roman infantry struggles to engage effectively. The Parthians remain beyond easy reach, showering the legions with arrows while avoiding close combat unless conditions favour them. The famous Parthian shot becomes legendary mounted archers firing backward accurately while retreating at speed. Ancient observers describe Roman soldiers trapped under relentless missile fire, unable to force decisive engagement. Carry ends in catastrophe for Rome. What makes the defeat so significant is not merely the casualties, but the revelation that disciplined heavy infantry alone cannot dominate every battlefield. Roman military confidence suffers deeply because the empire encounters a form of warfare operating according to entirely different rules, and the Parthians themselves inherit many traditions from earlier steppe cultures, blended with Persian political structures. This combination proves extraordinarily resilient. The evidence remains incomplete regarding the precise military organisation of some steppe confederations, because many leave limited written records of their own. Much of what survives comes from enemies describing them through fear, misunderstanding, or prejudice. Yet archaeology increasingly reveals sophisticated trade networks, political alliances, and military coordination across the steppe world. Communication becomes one of their hidden strengths. Mounted messengers move rapidly across vast distances. Signals spread through mobile camps. Alliances shift quickly. Some confederations unite enormous territories temporarily under charismatic leaders, before fragmenting again after succession struggles or environmental pressures. This fluidity frustrates empires accustomed to conquering fixed capitals. Destroying one settlement rarely ends resistance because power itself remains mobile. Climate also shapes steppe warfare profoundly. Droughts, harsh winters, and shifting grazing conditions can trigger migrations involving entire populations. Sometimes these movements bring steppe armies directly into conflict with agricultural civilizations. The arrival of mounted peoples along imperial frontiers often creates cascading instability as displaced groups push others farther west or south. The Huns later become the most feared example in Europe during late antiquity. Contemporary descriptions portray them almost as supernatural invaders emerging from unknown lands. Roman writers emphasize speed, ferocity, and relentless mobility. Some accounts are exaggerated by terror and cultural bias, but the disruption they cause is undeniably real. Frontier systems collapse under pressure, refugee movements intensify, political alliances fracture. The psychological effect of highly mobile cavalry operating beyond traditional Roman control contributes directly to wider imperial instability. Yet steppe armies possess vulnerabilities too. Mobility depends heavily on pasture access and horse health. Long campaigns in heavily forested, mountainous, or densely urbanized terrain can reduce cavalry advantages. Political unity inside confederations often remains fragile. Leadership disputes split alliances rapidly. Some steppe empires expand with astonishing speed only to fragment almost immediately after strong rulers die. Still, their military legacy becomes permanent. Sedentary powers increasingly adopt cavalry tactics, mounted archery, and faster communication systems in response to steppe pressure. Armour evolves, fortifications adapt. Entire military doctrines change because of the challenge posed by horse-based warfare. What survives in the historical record suggests a recurring pattern across centuries. Whenever settled empires grow rigid, slow, or overly dependent on predictable systems, highly mobile enemies exploit those weaknesses mercilessly. And farther east, another civilization is already developing military methods built not around mobility alone, but around bureaucracy, engineering, and mass organization on a scale few ancient societies ever achieve. In China, armies are beginning to transform warfare through discipline measured not merely in courage, but in numbers so vast they reshape landscapes themselves. Across the northern frontier, signal fires ignite one after another beneath the night sky. From distant watchtowers, flames leap into darkness carrying warnings across mountains and river valleys, faster than riders alone could travel. Somewhere beyond the frontier, mounted raiders move through cold grasslands searching for weaknesses in the border defences. Inside fortified settlements, officials unroll military registers listing grain stores, conscription quotas, and supply routes. Workshops hammer iron into weapons in enormous quantities. Messengers ride along carefully maintained roads linking provincial garrisons to imperial centres hundreds of miles away. Or an ancient China evolves into something vast, methodical, and deeply administrative. To outsiders looking back from the modern world, ancient Chinese armies are often overshadowed in popular imagination by Rome, Greece, or later Mongol conquests. Yet for long stretches of history, Chinese states field military systems among the most organised and technologically advanced on Earth. Some campaigns involve troop numbers and logistical operations that challenge comprehension even today. Massive fortifications reshape landscapes. Standardised weapons appear centuries before similar developments elsewhere. Bureaucracy itself becomes a weapon of war. The roots of this transformation emerged during the long and violent struggles of the Warring States period. Between roughly the 5th and 3rd centuries BCE, competing kingdoms fight relentlessly for survival and dominance across northern China. Earlier aristocratic warfare built around noble chariots gradually gives way to something far more dangerous: mass mobilization. As populations grow and agricultural systems intensify, rulers gain access to unprecedented manpower, armies expand dramatically, warfare becomes increasingly industrial in scale. States capable of organizing labor, taxation, agriculture, and military service most efficiently begin overpowering weaker rivals. One lesser known but crucial innovation appears in weapon production. Archaeological evidence suggests some Chinese states develop remarkably standardized manufacturing techniques for bronze and later iron weapons. Crossbow triggers, arrowheads, and other military equipment are produced in large quantities with interchangeable components. This level of standardization reflects not only technological skill, but administrative sophistication. The crossbow itself changes ancient warfare profoundly. Unlike traditional bows requiring years of physical conditioning and training, crossbows allow relatively inexperienced soldiers to deliver powerful ranged attacks with shorter preparation. Some models penetrate armor effectively at considerable distance. Ancient texts describe disciplined volleys capable of devastating advancing formations. Scholars still debate the precise tactical deployment of early Chinese crossbows because surviving records vary, but what survives in the archaeological record strongly suggests large-scale organised use, combined with infantry formations, cavalry support, and fortified defences. These weapons contribute to increasingly complex battlefield systems, and complexity becomes the defining feature of Chinese military development. The state of Qin eventually rises above its rivals not solely because of battlefield courage, but because of relentless efficiency. Qin rulers centralize authority aggressively, weaken hereditary aristocracy, standardize laws, and organize society around military and agricultural productivity. Merit within the army becomes increasingly important compared to noble birth. This creates a military machine capable of sustained expansion. The armies of Qin conquer rival states one by one through coordinated campaigns combining logistics, engineering, and overwhelming manpower. Roads are expanded, canals support transport, agricultural reforms increase food production necessary to sustain prolonged warfare. The state effectively transforms economic administration into military advantage. When Qin finally unifies China in 221 BCE under Qin Shi Huang, the result is one of the great turning points in ancient history. Yet unity brings new dangers immediately. The empire's frontiers remain vulnerable to raids from nomadic groups beyond the northern borders. Internal rebellions threaten stability. Massive construction projects consume labour and resources. The famous Great Wall itself is not a single structure built all at once, but a series of connected fortifications developed across centuries by different states, attempting to manage frontier threats. What survives in the record suggests these defensive systems are astonishingly demanding to maintain. Garrisons require constant supply. Harsh climates exhaust soldiers stationed far from home. Construction costs human lives on an enormous scale. Some later stories exaggerate dramatically, but archaeological evidence confirms brutal labour conditions across many frontier projects. The terracotta army buried near the tomb of Qin Shi Huang offers another haunting glimpse into the military imagination of the period. Thousands of life-sized clay soldiers stand arranged in battle formation beneath the earth, complete with officers, cavalry, chariots, and infantry units. Each face appears distinct. The scale is extraordinary. The burial complex reveals more than imperial vanity. It reflects a worldview in which military order extends even into death itself. But Chinese warfare does not remain static after unification. The Han dynasty that follows adapts continuously to changing threats. Frontier conflict with steppe confederations, especially the Xiongnu, forces major military evolution. Cavalry becomes increasingly important. Diplomacy, tribute, trade, and marriage alliances intertwine with open warfare. This combination of military and political strategy becomes one of the enduring strengths of Chinese imperial systems. Unlike simpler narratives focused only on conquest, Chinese states often pursue layered approaches to frontier management. Some enemies are fought directly, others are divided diplomatically or economically. Trade routes become strategic tools. Fortified colonies extend influence gradually into contested regions. At the same time, the scale of Chinese military mobilization reaches extraordinary levels. Ancient records sometimes describe campaigns involving hundreds of thousands of troops. Historians remain cautious because chroniclers frequently exaggerate numbers, but even conservative estimates indicate forces far larger than those fielded simultaneously in many other ancient regions. Managing such armies requires staggering organization. Grain transport becomes critical. Canal systems expand partly to support military logistics. Officials monitor harvests carefully because famine can destroy campaigns before battles begin. Disease spreads rapidly through large encampments. Harsh winters along frontier regions kill soldiers and animals alike. Nature remains a constant enemy. One lesser-known detail from excavated military documents reveals the ordinary anxieties of frontier life. Bamboo slips and administrative records mention missing supplies, exhausted soldiers, broken equipment, and requests for warm clothing during severe weather. Beneath the image of enormous imperial armies lies the daily struggle of individual human survival. And despite its sophistication, no military system remains secure forever. Court politics increasingly interfere with command decisions. Corruption weakens supply chains. Powerful regional generals accumulate influence. Peasant uprisings erupt when taxation and labour demands become unbearable. The same centralised structures that create military strength also create catastrophic vulnerability when administration falters. The evidence remains incomplete regarding many ancient Chinese battles because historical records were often shaped by dynastic politics and later reinterpretation. Victorious rulers rewrote narratives. Failures were minimised or blamed on individuals rather than systems, but the broader truth remains unmistakable. Ancient Chinese states developed military organisation on a scale and level of complexity far beyond what many people imagine when thinking about the ancient world. Their armies are not merely large collections of soldiers, they're extensions of bureaucratic civilization itself. And while China builds walls, roads, and administrative empires in the east. Far to the west, another commander is preparing to unleash a smaller army whose speed, flexibility, and ambition will briefly overturn nearly every established power between Greece and India. An army carried not by overwhelming numbers alone, but by momentum so relentless it will seem almost unstoppable. Alexander is about to begin marching. The horses scream before the battle even begins. Dust rolls across the plains near Gaugamela as thousands of Persian troops maneuver beneath the burning heat. Scythed chariots stand ready along the front lines, their blades designed to tear through infantry formations. Cavalry units stretch outward across open ground in numbers so vast that ancient observers struggle to describe them consistently. Somewhere behind the centre, King Darius III watches the approaching Macedonian army advancing in disciplined silence. Compared to the empire facing it, the invading force looks dangerously small, and yet the smaller army keeps winning. Alexander III of Macedon enters history surrounded by mythology almost immediately. Later generations transform him into conqueror, philosopher king, explorer, visionary, and near-divine hero. The legend grows so enormous that it often obscures the reality behind his campaigns. Alexander's victories are extraordinary, but they do not emerge from genius alone. They depend on an army forged through decades of reform, discipline, and tactical innovation before he even takes the throne. The foundations are laid by his father, Philip II. When Philip rises to power in Macedon during the 4th century BCE, the kingdom is considered rough and peripheral by many southern Greeks, but Philip studies the warfare of neighbouring states carefully. He reorganises the army systematically, combining Greek infantry traditions with greater mobility, stronger cavalry integration, and relentless professionalisation. The Macedonian phalanx becomes central to this transformation. Unlike traditional Greek hoplites using shorter spears, Macedonian infantry carry the sarissa, an enormous pike that may extend more than 5 metres in length. In dense formation, these weapons create terrifying defensive depth. Several rows of spear points project outward simultaneously, making frontal assault extraordinarily dangerous. Yet the phalanx alone is not the true secret. Its strength lies in coordination with cavalry and flexible supporting units. This becomes the defining feature of Alexander's army. Different components operate together with remarkable speed and discipline. Heavy infantry pins enemies in place while cavalry strikes vulnerable flanks. Light troops harass exposed formations. Engineers support river crossings and sieges. Communication and timing become critical. The system functions almost like a living mechanism. One lesser-known detail reveals how intensely Alexander values mobility. His army often travels with relatively limited baggage compared to many rivals. Speed becomes strategic advantage. Forced marches allow sudden appearances in regions enemies believe safe. Soldiers endure brutal conditions crossing deserts, mountains, and hostile territory because momentum itself becomes part of the campaign. At the Battle of Issus, Alexander faces the Persian king Darius III directly for the first time. The terrain narrows near the coast, reducing Persia's numerical advantage. Macedonian formations hold under pressure, while Alexander leads cavalry charges aimed directly toward the Persian centre, and here another recurring pattern of ancient warfare appears. Once rulers or command structures collapse visibly, morale often follows quickly. Darius eventually flees the battlefield. Persian resistance disintegrates despite many units still fighting effectively. Ancient warfare depends heavily on cohesion, perception, and leadership visibility. Panic spreads faster than orders, but even after victories like Issus, Persia remains immensely powerful. The empire still controls enormous resources and manpower. Many rulers would consolidate carefully after such success. Alexander does the opposite. He accelerates. Sieges become essential because coastal cities and fortified strongholds control supply routes and political legitimacy. The Siege of Tyre reveals both the brilliance and brutality of Alexander's campaigns. Tyre sits partly on an island heavily protected by walls rising directly from the sea. Direct assault appears nearly impossible, so Alexander attempts something astonishing. His engineers begin constructing a massive causeway through the water toward the city itself using stone, timber, and debris. Defenders attack constantly with missiles and fire ships. Construction crews die in large numbers. Progress is painfully slow, yet the work continues. The siege lasts months before Tyre finally falls. Ancient accounts describe severe retaliation afterward. Scholars debate casualty figures and some details remain uncertain. But the broader reality is clear enough resistance against Alexander can carry devastating consequences. This duality defines his reputation across the ancient world. Liberator in some regions, destroyer in others. At Gaugamela, Alexander confronts the Persian Empire's final major attempt to stop him. Darius selects broad open terrain favourable for cavalry and chariots. Persian numbers likely exceed Macedonian forces substantially, though ancient figures are probably exaggerated. The battle demonstrates the extraordinary adaptability of Alexander's army. When Persian chariots advance, Macedonian troops open controlled gaps in their formations, allowing many vehicles to pass harmlessly before attacking from the sides. Cavalry manoeuvres stretch the battlefield outward. Then Alexander identifies a weakening point near the Persian centre and launches a concentrated assault directly toward Darius. Again, the Persian king flees. Again, cohesion collapses. And with that, one of the largest empires in history effectively falls beneath a force vastly smaller than itself. Yet beneath the triumph lies fragility. Alexander's empire expands faster than stable administration can fully support. Conquered territories remain culturally diverse and politically complex. Garrisons are scattered across enormous distances. Local resistance erupts repeatedly. The army itself grows strained after years of constant campaigning. The farther east Alexander marches, the more difficult everything becomes. Terrain shifts dramatically. Supply lines stretch thinner. Monsoon weather shocks Macedonian troops in India. War elephants appear in battle. Terrifying horses unfamiliar with them. Rivers swell unpredictably. Casualties accumulate steadily even during victories. One lesser-known aspect of Alexander's campaigns is the increasing exhaustion and tension inside the army. Soldiers are aging. Veterans want to return home. Officers compete for influence. Macedonian identity itself becomes strained as Alexander adopts elements of Persian court culture and integrates foreign troops into the military structure. Scholars still debate Alexander's long-term intentions because the evidence remains incomplete. Some believe he envisioned a blended imperial system combining Macedonian and Persian traditions. Others argue his ambitions were becoming increasingly unrealistic. What survives in the historical record suggests a man driving both himself and his army beyond sustainable limits. And then, suddenly, he dies. In Babylon, at only 32 years old, Alexander falls ill and never recovers. The exact cause remains uncertain. Disease, infection, poisoning theories, exhaustion, or complications from accumulated injuries have all been proposed. No single explanation fully accounts for every surviving description. His death reveals the weakness hidden beneath his astonishing conquests. The empire depends too heavily on one individual. Without Alexander, unity fractures almost immediately. Generals turn against each other, territories split apart, decades of warfare follow as successors struggle for control, yet the military legacy survives. Hellenistic kingdoms spread Macedonian military methods across huge regions, combined arms tactics evolve further, siege warfare intensifies, Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Asian traditions blend together in new forms. Alexander's campaigns prove something both inspiring and terrifying. A smaller, highly disciplined, mobile army can destroy powers far larger than itself if leadership's timing and momentum align perfectly. But they also reveal another truth. No conquest moves faster than the ability to hold it together afterward, and far beyond the Mediterranean and Persia, hidden beneath jungles, mountains, and tropical forests, other military civilizations are rising whose armies will leave behind only fragments of memory buried beneath earth and stone. The jungle swallows cities slowly. Stone stairways disappear beneath roots thicker than human bodies. Temple walls crack apart under centuries of rain and creeping vegetation. Monkeys move through collapsed palaces where kings once received tribute from conquered territories. In some places, entire roads vanish beneath layers of mud and forest growth so complete that the outlines of ancient military networks remain invisible until modern aerial scanning reveals them from above. For generations, many outsiders assume the great civilizations of tropical regions are smaller, weaker, or less organized than the famous empires of Europe and the Near East. The archaeology tells a different story. Across Southeast Asia and Mesoamerica, powerful kingdoms build armies capable of conquest, large-scale engineering, and sophisticated warfare under environmental conditions many foreign invaders later struggle even to survive. Their military traditions often remain poorly understood because humid climates destroy organic material quickly. Written records are fragmented, and colonial narratives frequently minimize indigenous achievements. Yet what survives reveals societies far stronger and more complex than long imagined. In the tropical lowlands of the Maya world, warfare shapes politics constantly. The ancient Maya are sometimes remembered mainly for astronomy, pyramids, or mysterious collapse, but their cities exist inside an intensely competitive landscape. Rival kingdoms form alliances, conduct raids, capture nobles, and wage prolonged conflicts across dense forests and difficult terrain. The environment itself transforms how armies operate. Unlike the broad open plains favoured by cavalry empires, Maya warfare unfolds through jungle corridors, elevated causeways, rivers, and fortified cities surrounded by thick vegetation. Movement is exhausting. Heat and humidity drain energy rapidly. Supply transport becomes difficult. Visibility is limited. Armies capable of navigating these landscapes efficiently possess major advantages. One lesser-known detail emerges from inscriptions and murals discovered at sites like Bonampak. These artworks depict not ceremonial skirmishes alone, but brutal organised warfare involving captives, elite warriors, coordinated attacks, and political intimidation. Some earlier scholars underestimated the scale of Maya conflict, imagining warfare as relatively symbolic or ritualised. Modern evidence strongly suggests many wars are deadly struggles for power, tribute, and survival. Captured rulers hold particular importance. Maya political systems are deeply tied to royal legitimacy and sacred authority. Defeating or capturing elite figures can destabilise entire city-states. Warfare therefore becomes psychological as much as territorial. Public humiliation of defeated nobles reinforces dominance across regional networks. And despite the challenges of jungle terrain, Maya cities build impressive defensive systems. Fortified walls, watchpoints, and strategically placed settlements appear across multiple regions, especially during periods of heightened instability. Some cities relocate toward more defensible terrain as warfare intensifies during later centuries. Yet the evidence remains incomplete regarding the full scale of Maya armies because dense forests conceal many sites, and organic materials decay rapidly. New discoveries continue reshaping understanding. LiDAR scanning technology has recently revealed extensive road systems, terraces, fortifications, and hidden urban landscapes beneath jungle canopy, suggesting population density and military organization far beyond earlier estimates. The jungle concealed complexity for centuries. Farther south and west, the Aztec Empire rises through military expansion, intertwined with tribute extraction and ritual authority. From their island capital of Tenochtitlan, built within the lakes of central Mexico, the Aztecs create one of the most formidable military systems in the Americas before European arrival. To later Spanish observers, Tenochtitlan appears astonishing. Causeways connect the city across water, markets operate at enormous scale, canals cut through urban districts, temples dominate the skyline. Beneath the grandeur stands a military state dependent on conquest. Aztec warfare serves multiple functions simultaneously. Territory and tribute matter enormously. Conquered regions provide food, labour, textiles, luxury goods, and political submission. But warfare also carries ritual significance tied to religion, prestige, and cosmic order. Elite warriors gain status through battlefield achievement and prisoner capture. Some later accounts portray Aztec armies as technologically primitive compared to Eurasian powers because they lack iron metallurgy, cavalry, or gunpowder. This interpretation misses the sophistication of their actual military systems. Aztec forces organize into structured units with recognizable insignia, elite warrior societies, logistical planning, and extensive training traditions. Terrain again plays a critical role. Central Mexico's lakes, mountains, and urban causeways create highly defensible environments. During the Spanish conquest centuries later, indigenous armies repeatedly demonstrate tactical skill, adaptability, and local environmental knowledge that initially shocks European invaders. One lesser-known reality is that the fall of the Aztec Empire does not occur through small numbers of Europeans defeating vast armies alone. The situation is far more complicated. Existing regional rivalries, disease, political fractures, and alliances with indigenous enemies of the Aztecs all contribute enormously to the outcome. What survives in the record suggests many local groups view the conflict partly as opportunity to overturn imperial domination. In Southeast Asia, powerful military kingdoms rise within equally demanding landscapes. The Khmer Empire, centered around the great city complex of Angkor, develops extensive hydraulic systems capable of supporting enormous populations. Massive reservoirs and canals reshape the environment itself. Such infrastructure also supports military logistics and political control. Armies move along river systems and engineered routes through monsoon climates where seasonal flooding transforms geography dramatically. Control over water becomes inseparable from power. Temple carvings from Angkor depict military processions, naval engagements, elephants in warfare, and disciplined infantry formations. War elephants become especially important across parts of Southeast Asia, functioning as mobile command platforms and instruments of psychological intimidation. Their presence on the battlefield can terrify inexperienced troops and disrupt formations. Yet elephants also introduce unpredictability. Injured or panicked animals may trample friendly soldiers. Managing them requires extensive training and coordination. Scholars still debate the exact military capacities of some Southeast Asian states because surviving records are uneven and environmental conditions destroy evidence rapidly. But archaeology increasingly reveals sophisticated urban systems, long-distance trade, and organized political structures capable of supporting major armies. And again, environment shapes everything. Tropical disease kills enormous numbers during campaigns. Monsoon seasons alter movement routes. Dense forests restrict visibility and communication. Armies unable to adapt to local climates collapse quickly from exhaustion, infection, or starvation even without major battle. This is one reason many tropical military powers remain underestimated historically. Their achievements are harder to preserve materially than stone-heavy Mediterranean civilizations surviving in drier climates. But fragments endure. Fortified hill settlements hidden beneath jungle canopy, obsidian blades buried alongside warriors, burn layers marking destroyed cities, causeways stretching through wetlands toward long-abandoned capitals. Together they reveal a broader truth. Ancient military power is not confined to the Mediterranean, Persia, or China alone. Across radically different environments, human societies repeatedly develop organized systems of warfare adapted precisely to local conditions. And no matter the region, one challenge eventually confronts every army seeking conquest: walls. Sooner or later, expansion collides with fortified cities whose defenders refuse surrender, and across the ancient world, siege warfare evolves into one of humanity's most relentless and terrifying forms of organized violence. Because defeating an army in open battle is one thing, breaking an entire city is something else entirely. The walls rise above the attackers like cliffs. From the battlements, defenders watch thousands of soldiers spreading across the surrounding fields, cutting roads, seizing wells, and raising camps beyond bow range. Smoke drifts upward from villages already burned outside the city perimeter. Inside the gates, anxiety spreads quickly. Granaries are counted. Livestock is moved into protected courtyards. Wells are inspected obsessively. Every family understands the same terrible truth. If help does not arrive in time, the city itself will become a prison. Siege warfare transforms ancient conflict more completely than almost any battlefield innovation. Open battles may decide individual campaigns, but fortified cities control trade, agriculture, political legitimacy, and regional survival. As civilizations grow wealthier and more urbanized, walls become essential, and wherever walls rise, armies begin developing new ways to destroy them. The result is an escalating contest between defense and engineering that lasts for thousands of years. To modern imagination, ancient warfare is often reduced to dramatic clashes between armies in open terrain. Yet many campaigns are dominated instead by sieges stretching across months or even years. Hunger, disease, exhaustion, and fear kill far more people than direct combat in many cases. Cities become trapped ecosystems slowly collapsing under pressure. One lesser-known detail from archaeological excavations reveals how systematic siege preparation can become. At several ancient sites, attackers construct circumvallation walls completely surrounding target cities. These fortifications protect besieging armies from counterattack while preventing escape or resupply. In some cases, secondary outward-facing walls are added as protection against relief forces arriving from outside. The besiegers effectively build temporary cities devoted entirely to destruction. Inside the walls, daily life deteriorates rapidly. Food shortages emerge first, grain is rationed carefully, animals are slaughtered, eventually people consume whatever remains available. Ancient texts occasionally describe horrifying acts during prolonged sieges, including cannibalism, though some accounts are likely exaggerated for propaganda or moral effect. Even so, archaeological evidence confirms extreme starvation conditions in certain besieged populations. Water becomes equally dangerous. Attackers poison wells, divert rivers, or destroy aqueducts whenever possible. Contaminated water spreads disease through already weakened populations. In crowded cities lacking proper sanitation under siege conditions, infection can spread catastrophically. And all the while, the walls themselves are under constant assault. Ancient siegecraft evolves into a science of pressure and collapse. Battering rams hammer gates repeatedly beneath protective coverings soaked in water against fire. Siege towers roll forward carrying archers and assault troops to equal wall height. Sappers tunnel underground attempting to weaken foundations. Defenders respond with countermines, burning pitch, falling stones, and desperate repairs carried out under missile fire. The struggle becomes intensely physical. At the Siege of Plataea during the Peloponnesian War, attackers attempt to overwhelm walls using massive earth ramps built gradually upward toward the fortifications. Defenders counter by raising wall sections higher and tunneling beneath the ramps to destabilize them. The siege turns into a brutal contest of engineering adaptation. Centuries later, at Masada near the Dead Sea, Roman forces construct an enormous siege ramp against the mountain fortress held by Jewish rebels. The structure remains partially visible even today, a scar across the landscape demonstrating the sheer labour ancient armies could command. Thousands of soldiers and labourers move earth and stone relentlessly under harsh desert conditions, simply to bring siege engines within reach. What survives in the historical record suggests siege warfare often becomes psychological long before final assault begins. Attackers display prisoners publicly, defenders execute captured scouts on the walls, negotiations alternate with threats, drums, horns, and war cries echo through the night. Sleep deprivation alone weakens resistance over time. Ancient commanders understand morale can collapse suddenly once defenders believe survival is impossible. The Assyrians' perfect terror as siege strategy centuries earlier, but many later empires adopt similar methods. Rome occasionally massacres resisting populations after difficult sieges as warning to others. Mongol armies in later centuries will elevate psychological warfare to terrifying effectiveness by allowing survivors from destroyed cities to spread stories ahead of advancing forces. Fear travels faster than armies, and then there are the machines. The Hellenistic world following Alexander witnesses major advances in siege technology. Massive torsion-powered catapults launch stones and bolts, capable of smashing fortifications or clearing battlements. Engineers experiment constantly with mechanical innovations. Some siege towers become enormous multi-level structures armoured against fire and packed with soldiers. At Rhodes, one gigantic siege tower reportedly rises over 40 metres high, though ancient descriptions may exaggerate somewhat. Even reduced estimates suggest astonishing scale. The machinery of siege warfare becomes increasingly sophisticated because fortified cities themselves are becoming stronger. No single explanation fully accounts for why some cities withstand impossible odds while others collapse quickly. Terrain matters, leadership matters, supply levels matter, chance matters too. A single breached gate or accidental fire can determine survival. The evidence remains incomplete for countless forgotten sieges because only victorious powers usually leave detailed records. Entire cities disappear without preserving their own perspectives. Archaeologists uncover destruction layers but rarely recover the full human experience hidden inside them. Still, fragments survive. Arrowheads embedded in collapsed walls, skeletons buried hastily beneath burned streets, siege stones scattered near breached fortifications, letters describing starvation, fear, and dwindling hope. One haunting example comes from the final Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE. Contemporary accounts describe famine so severe that internal violence erupts among defenders themselves. Roman forces gradually tighten control around the city, while constructing siegeworks and assault ramps. Fires consume sections of the temple complex during the final stages of the assault. The destruction reshapes religious and political history permanently, but siege warfare destroys attackers too. Large armies surrounding cities face disease constantly, camps become overcrowded, supply lines remain vulnerable, harsh weather ruins equipment and food stores, a besieging force trapped too long may become weaker than the defenders it hoped to starve out, nature intervenes unpredictably, heavy rain collapses siege ramps, heat spreads sickness, winter freezes supply routes. Some campaigns fail not because defenders are stronger, but because time itself becomes unbearable. This is why siege warfare reveals the deepest reality of ancient military power. Victory is rarely clean. Even successful armies emerge exhausted, diseased, undermanned, and psychologically scarred after prolonged sieges. Conquest consumes resources almost as rapidly as resistance, and beyond walls, beyond battlefields and fortresses, another enemy waits for every army regardless of size or skill, an enemy no formation can fully defeat. Cold, heat, exhaustion, starvation, the natural world itself, because many of history's strongest armies do not perish beneath enemy weapons alone. They die trying to survive the earth. The snow keeps falling long after the army stops moving. At first the soldiers try to maintain formation, pulling cloaks tighter against the wind while officers shout commands barely audible through the storm. Horses collapse beside the road with ice forming around their mouths. Fires refuse to stay lit. Wagons freeze into place. Men who sit down to rest for only a few moments do not stand up again. No enemy attacks. None are necessary. Across ancient history, nature destroys armies with terrifying efficiency. Entire campaigns collapse beneath drought, disease, heat, floods, exhaustion, or winter conditions commanders fail to understand fully. Battlefields create legends, but climate quietly shapes outcomes on an even larger scale. Some of the strongest military systems ever built discover too late that logistics and survival matter more than courage alone. Ancient warfare is inseparable from environment. Before modern medicine, refrigeration, engines, or rapid communication, armies remain deeply vulnerable to conditions beyond human control. Tens of thousands of people and animals moving together consume staggering amounts of food and water. Roads become mud after heavy rain. Rivers swell unpredictably. Heat spoils grain. Cold destroys equipment. Disease spreads through camps faster than any messenger can travel. And unlike modern militaries, ancient armies possess only limited understanding of infection or sanitation. One lesser-known detail from Roman military camps reveals how seriously some armies attempt to manage these dangers. Roman engineers design drainage systems and latrines carefully within fortified camps to reduce contamination. Clean water access becomes a strategic priority. Yet even disciplined sanitation cannot fully stop outbreaks once large forces gather for prolonged periods. Dysentery, malaria, typhus, and countless other illnesses haunt campaigns constantly. What survives in historical records often underestimates these losses, because chroniclers focus heavily on battles and leaders. But archaeological evidence suggests disease may kill more soldiers than combat during many ancient wars. Skeletons from military burial grounds show signs of malnutrition, chronic infection, and physical exhaustion accumulated over years. The environment shapes military cultures differently depending on region. In desert warfare, water determines survival completely. Armies crossing arid landscapes calculate movement around wells and seasonal conditions. A poisoned spring or failed supply caravan can doom thousands. Persian and later Islamic armies operating in dry regions develop extensive logistical expertise, partly because mistakes are fatal almost immediately. The march of Cambyses II into Egypt demonstrates both the possibilities and dangers of desert campaigning. Ancient accounts describe massive Persian forces crossing harsh terrain successfully through careful preparation. Yet another expedition sent toward the Siwa oasis reportedly vanishes into the desert entirely, swallowed perhaps by sandstorms or logistical failure. The story may contain exaggeration, but it reflects real ancient fear of landscapes capable of erasing armies without trace. In tropical regions, heat and disease become relentless enemies. Campaigns through jungles or wetlands exhaust soldiers unused to humidity, insects, and contaminated water. Armor becomes oppressive beneath extreme heat. Food rots rapidly. Open wounds become infected with terrifying speed. Armies entering unfamiliar climates often suffer catastrophic losses before major battle even begins. What survives in the record suggests local populations frequently exploit environmental knowledge against invading forces. Ambushes target exhausted troops moving through difficult terrain. Supply routes are disrupted during monsoon seasons or floods. Guerrilla tactics become especially effective where outsiders struggle simply to survive daily conditions. The same pattern appears repeatedly throughout history. Armies adapted to one environment often fail disastrously in another. Even the mighty Roman military encounters severe limitations in forests and cold northern climates. Dense woodland restricts formation maneuvering. Heavy armor becomes exhausting during long marches through mud and rain. Communication breaks down easily in unfamiliar terrain. The disaster in the Teutoburg forest in 9 CE reveals this vulnerability with horrifying clarity. Roman legions advancing through wet forested terrain are ambushed by Germanic forces familiar with the environment. Narrow paths prevent effective deployment. Rain weakens equipment and morale. Visibility collapses among trees and mud. 3 legions disappear. The psychological shock inside Rome is enormous because the defeat exposes the limits of imperial military confidence. Discipline and engineering remain powerful advantages, but terrain can neutralize them brutally. Cold weather creates another category of ancient military nightmare. Winter campaigns are extraordinarily dangerous before modern cold-weather gear and reliable food preservation. Frostbite, exposure, and starvation destroy morale rapidly. Frozen roads become impassable for supply wagons. Animals die in large numbers, removing transport capability precisely when survival depends on movement. Even armies victorious in battle may perish during retreat. Xenophon's account of the 10,000s of Greek mercenaries stranded deep inside hostile territory after the death of Cyrus the Younger provides one of the ancient world's clearest descriptions of survival under extreme conditions. During their retreat northward, the soldiers endure freezing mountains, shortages of food, ambushes, and exhaustion so severe that simple movement becomes agonizing, and yet they continue marching. This endurance becomes one of the defining qualities of strong ancient armies. Not invincibility, but resilience under conditions that seem unbearable. The Mongols' later perfect environmental adaptation on an astonishing level. Their armies travel immense distances across steppe landscapes, carrying relatively little compared to sedentary forces. Riders rotate among multiple horses. Armies survive partly through mobility and deep practical understanding of climate, pasture, and seasonal timing. But even highly adaptive systems face limits. Drought can devastate grazing conditions essential for cavalry empires. Failed harvests trigger unrest inside agricultural states. Volcanic eruptions and climate shifts alter entire geopolitical balances over time. Scholars still debate the precise role environmental stress plays in some ancient collapses, because the evidence remains incomplete and causes are rarely simple. Yet increasing archaeological and climate data suggest droughts, cooling periods, floods, and ecological strain frequently intensify existing political and military crises. Nature rarely acts alone. Instead, it amplifies fragility already present beneath the surface. One haunting example appears during the later years of the Bronze Age collapse around the eastern Mediterranean. Cities burn, trade systems disintegrate, populations migrate, armies fail to maintain order across multiple kingdoms almost simultaneously. Warfare contributes heavily, but evidence increasingly points toward interconnected pressures involving climate instability, famine, disrupted trade, and social breakdown. Even powerful military states prove vulnerable once food systems and infrastructure begin failing. This remains one of the deepest truths of ancient warfare. No army operates independently from the environment supporting it. Every campaign depends ultimately on rivers flowing, crops growing, animals surviving, and roads remaining passable. Empires often appear unstoppable at their peak precisely because these invisible systems are functioning smoothly. Once they weaken, military power erodes with astonishing speed, and eventually, no matter how disciplined or feared an army becomes, the pressures begin accumulating, supplies fail, morale weakens, generals compete for power, conquered populations rebel. The machinery of conquest strains under its own weight, because the greatest danger to powerful armies often comes not from enemies outside their borders, but from collapse growing slowly within. The soldiers refuse to march. At first the officers believe the delay is temporary, another wave of exhaustion after months of campaigning. But the mood spreading through the camp feels different. Fires burn low beneath grey skies while men sit silently beside stacked shields and abandoned equipment. Horses remain tethered. Orders are repeated without response. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, enemy territory stretches toward distant mountains no one wishes to cross. The army has reached its limit. Every powerful military system in the ancient world eventually confronts the same invisible enemy strain. Victorious armies expand empires rapidly, but expansion creates burdens that grow heavier with every conquest. Supply lines lengthen, garrisons multiply, veterans age, political rivalries intensify, conquered peoples resist occupation. What once appears unstoppable slowly becomes fragile beneath the surface, and often the collapse begins long before outsiders recognize it. Ancient historians frequently describe empires falling through dramatic invasions or decisive battles, but the reality is usually slower and more complicated. Military systems erode internally over decades through exhaustion, corruption, demographic pressure, economic imbalance, and political division. The battlefield merely reveals weaknesses already present. Alexander's army offers one of the clearest examples. After years of relentless campaigning across Persia and into Central Asia, Macedonian troops become increasingly resistant to further advance. They have crossed deserts, stormed fortresses, fought unfamiliar enemies, and marched farther than most imagined possible. Casualties accumulate steadily. Reinforcements no longer share the same bonds as original veterans. The promise of endless conquest begins losing its appeal. At the Hyphasis River in India, the refusal becomes open. Alexander wants to continue eastward toward lands rumoured to contain even greater kingdoms. His soldiers refuse. Ancient sources describe emotional confrontations between commander and army, though details vary. What survives in the record suggests a simple reality: endurance has limits. Even inside one of history's most successful military forces, the empire never fully recovers from this moment psychologically. The Roman army experiences similar pressures on far greater scale centuries later. During expansion, conquest fuels the system itself. Victorious wars bring wealth, slaves, land, and political prestige. But once expansion slows, maintaining borders becomes increasingly expensive. Frontiers stretch across deserts, forests, rivers, and mountains impossible to secure completely. The empire requires permanent garrisons stationed far from Italy for years or decades. soldiers begin identifying more strongly with local commanders or frontier regions than with Rome itself. Civil wars erupt repeatedly as ambitious generals use loyal armies to pursue political power. One lesser-known detail appears in military pay records and administrative complaints from later imperial periods. Corruption spreads gradually through supply systems, equipment quality declines in some regions, delayed wages create unrest, desertion increases along difficult frontiers. These are not dramatic battlefield defeats, they are symptoms of systemic fatigue. Meanwhile, external enemies adapt continuously. Germanic tribes learn Roman tactics, Persian forces reorganize repeatedly under new dynasties, steppe confederations exploit frontier weaknesses through rapid movement and raids. No military advantage remains permanent once rivals begin studying it carefully. And there is another problem every ancient empire struggles to solve: succession. When powerful rulers die, armies often become kingmakers. Soldiers expect rewards, loyalty payments, or political influence. Competing claimants promise wealth and advancement. Civil wars follow. The military system designed to defend the empire turns inward against itself. The Roman Empire experiences this repeatedly during the crisis of the 3rd century. Emperors rise and fall with astonishing speed. Some reign only months before assassination. Frontier defences weaken while armies support rival claimants across different regions. Yet even during crisis, the empire demonstrates extraordinary resilience. Reforms temporarily stabilise the military through reorganisation, frontier restructuring, and administrative changes. This ability to adapt repeatedly explains why Rome survives far longer than many rivals. Still, adaptation cannot erase every pressure forever. The Assyrian Empire collapses even more dramatically. For centuries, Assyrian armies dominate the Near East through terror, siegecraft, and relentless expansion. But constant warfare drains resources and intensifies hatred among subject peoples. Once internal instability combines with coordinated external attacks, the system unravels rapidly. The destruction of Assyrian capitals shocks neighbouring civilizations precisely because the empire once seemed invincible. This pattern repeats throughout ancient history. Strong armies create the illusion of permanence, but permanence is often the first illusion to die. Environmental strain accelerates these collapses further. Failed harvests weaken taxation. Drought triggers migration and rebellion. Disease spreads through overcrowded cities and military camps. What appears from a distance as purely military decline is often connected deeply to economic and ecological instability. Scholars still debate the exact causes behind several major ancient collapses because no single explanation fully accounts for the complexity involved. Political corruption alone is insufficient. Foreign invasion alone rarely explains everything. Climate pressure alone cannot account for every regional difference. Instead, collapse usually emerges from multiple systems failing simultaneously, and the armies themselves often recognise decline before official histories admit it. Archaeological evidence from later Roman forts reveals reduced troop numbers, improvised repairs, and declining infrastructure quality in some frontier regions. Coin hoards buried during unstable periods suggest fear and insecurity spreading among civilian populations. In China, dynastic transitions frequently coincide with peasant uprisings, military mutinies, and regional fragmentation after long periods of overextension. The emotional toll on soldiers also matters. Ancient warfare produces exhaustion difficult to measure directly in surviving records. Veterans spend years away from families enduring marches, disease, fear, and repeated violence. Morale erodes gradually when campaigns appear endless, or leadership loses legitimacy. One haunting example appears during the retreat of the Athenian army from Sicily during the Peloponnesian War. After catastrophic defeat, surviving soldiers attempt to escape under brutal conditions while enemy forces pursue constantly. Ancient descriptions portray disciplined armies dissolving into desperate groups struggling simply to survive thirst, panic, and confusion. Military collapse is often psychological before it becomes physical. Once confidence disappears, even strong formations disintegrate rapidly, and yet the memory of great armies rarely vanishes completely after collapse. Successor states inherit weapons, roads, tactics, and administrative methods from fallen powers. Former enemies adopt innovations once feared. Veterans train new generations. Military culture survives in fragments long after empires disappear. This is why archaeologists continue uncovering traces of ancient armies in places where written history fell silent centuries ago. Mass graves hidden beneath fields, broken weapons beneath riverbeds, fortresses abandoned so completely that forests grow over their walls. The ground remembers what empires forget. And buried beneath earth across the ancient world are clues still reshaping how modern scholars understand the true scale, violence, and sophistication of these lost military systems. Because many ancient armies are still speaking to the present, not through surviving kings or monuments, but through bones. The skeletons lie exactly where they fell. Some are face down in the mud with broken spearheads still lodged between ribs. Others are tangled together in collapsed defensive trenches beneath layers of ash and shattered stone. Horses appear beside them, their bones twisted beneath ruined harnesses and fragments of armour green with corrosion after centuries underground. At first glance, the sight looks chaotic, almost impossible to interpret. But slowly, through excavation and analysis, patterns begin to emerge. An army died here, and for thousands of years, nobody remembered its name. Much of what the modern world understands about ancient warfare survives not through written history, but through archaeology. chronicles exaggerate victories, kings erase defeats, empires rewrite narratives to glorify themselves, yet the ground preserves quieter truths: broken weapons, fortifications, burial pits, damaged bones, abandoned camps, and burned cities reveal realities no surviving ruler intended to leave behind. In many ways, archaeology has transformed the understanding of ancient armies more radically than almost any historical discovery. For centuries, historians relied heavily on elite-written accounts produced by victorious civilizations. Greek writers described Persians through Greek fears and prejudices. Roman historians emphasized Roman discipline while minimizing enemy sophistication. Conquered peoples often vanished almost entirely from written memory. But beneath fields, deserts, forests, and rivers, physical evidence waited. One of the most haunting discoveries comes from the Tollens Valley in northern Germany. Excavations reveal human remains, weapons, and debris dating to roughly 1200 BCE during the chaotic period surrounding the Bronze Age collapse. What initially appears to be isolated finds gradually expands into evidence of a massive violent confrontation. Arrowheads are embedded in bones, clubs fracture skulls, horse remains appear among the dead. Some bodies show healed injuries from earlier combat, suggesting experienced warriors rather than simple villagers caught in sudden violence. The scale surprises researchers deeply. What survives in the record suggests organised warfare involving large coordinated forces existed in northern Europe far earlier than many scholars once believed possible. The battle reshapes assumptions about social complexity, mobility, and military organisation during the Late Bronze Age, and Tollens is only one example. Across the ancient world, forgotten battlefields continue emerging unexpectedly. Construction projects uncover mass graves beneath modern cities. Drought reveals submerged ruins and fortifications. Advances in aerial imaging expose hidden road systems, camps, and defensive walls invisible from ground level. Technology itself becomes a new archaeological weapon. LiDAR scanning revolutionizes the study of ancient military landscapes in regions covered by dense vegetation. In parts of Central America and Southeast Asia, laser mapping reveals extensive urban networks, fortifications, terraces, and causeways hidden beneath jungle canopy. Entire military systems once assumed relatively small now appear vastly larger and more interconnected. The jungle concealed armies for centuries. Bioarchaeology adds another layer of understanding. Ancient skeletons preserve evidence of trauma, diet, disease, and physical strain. Repeated stress injuries reveal lives shaped by marching, riding, archery, or heavy labour. Healed fractures show survival after earlier battles. Some skulls preserve marks from surgical procedures like trepanation, where sections are cut into bone, possibly to treat combat injuries. One lesser-known detail emerges from isotope analysis of ancient remains. Scientists can sometimes determine where soldiers spent childhood, based on chemical signatures preserved in teeth and bones. This reveals surprisingly diverse armies. At several sites, soldiers buried together originate from widely separated regions, confirming the multinational character of many ancient military systems. Empires truly moved people across continents. The evidence remains incomplete. However, and archaeology often raises new questions faster than it answers old ones. A burned city does not automatically reveal who attacked it. Mass graves may result from battle, execution, famine, or disease. Written records sometimes contradict physical evidence sharply. This tension between text and archaeology becomes especially important when studying famous military narratives. Ancient chroniclers frequently inflate troop numbers dramatically. Victorious rulers exaggerate enemy losses while minimizing their own. Some battles celebrated in literature leave surprisingly limited archaeological trace, while obscure conflicts barely mentioned in surviving texts reveal immense destruction. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest offers a striking example. Roman accounts describe catastrophic defeat in the forest of Germania during 9 CE, but archaeology helps reconstruct the event with far greater precision. Excavations uncover weapons, armour fragments, coins, human remains, and battlefield debris scattered across difficult terrain. The distribution of artefacts suggests prolonged ambush and disintegration, rather than one single organised clash. Roman soldiers appear trapped across muddy wooded ground, where formation discipline gradually collapses under relentless attack. The landscape itself becomes part of the weapon. At other sites, archaeology exposes hidden brutality inside ancient empires often idealised later. Excavations in Assyrian and Roman provinces reveal destruction layers corresponding to rebellions crushed violently. Burned homes, civilian casualties, and emergency fortifications complicate simplified narratives of orderly imperial rule. Even celebrated military powers leave scars behind them. And then there are the mass graves. Some contain soldiers buried carefully by comrades after battle. Others show signs of hurried disposal or deliberate humiliation. At certain sites, bodies are piled chaotically without ceremony, suggesting defeat so overwhelming survivors lack time or ability for proper burial. The emotional weight of these discoveries is difficult to ignore. Ancient warfare becomes intensely human again when stripped of monuments and heroic language. Archaeologists uncover young men with shattered limbs, teenagers carrying combat injuries, and civilians trapped inside destruction zones. The physical evidence often contradicts romanticized visions of glorious conquest. One haunting pattern appears repeatedly across military cemeteries from multiple civilizations' chronic suffering. Veterans survive battle only to live with damaged joints, infections, missing teeth, spinal injuries, and long-term disability. ancient armies depend not only on courage during combat, but on extraordinary tolerance for pain and hardship afterward. And despite all modern advances, enormous gaps remain. Many battlefields are still undiscovered, organic materials vanish over time, looting destroys context, rivers shift course, urban development buries ancient landscapes beneath concrete and steel. Entire military cultures survive only through fragments so incomplete that scholars must reconstruct them cautiously from scattered clues. No single explanation fully accounts for the rise and fall of every ancient army, because evidence itself remains uneven and broken. But enough survives to reveal something extraordinary. The ancient world is far more interconnected, militarized, and sophisticated than older generations once believed. Armies crossed mountains, deserts, forests, and seas carrying ideas as well as weapons. Military innovation spread continuously between cultures often portrayed as isolated from one another, and the legacy of those armies never truly disappeared. Modern military organization, logistics, engineering, propaganda, frontier defense, discipline, and even concepts of imperial power still carry echoes from civilizations long buried beneath earth. Because ancient armies are not dead history, in many ways, they are still marching quietly through the structures of the modern world. The road stretches straight toward the horizon, laid stone by stone nearly 2,000 years ago. Rain has worn grooves into its surface, grass pushes through cracks where soldiers once marched beneath heavy packs and fluttering standards. In some places, the road disappears beneath modern towns or farmland, yet sections still survive with astonishing clarity, linking forgotten forts, ruined cities, and abandoned frontier walls across entire continents. Empires vanish. The military ideas they create often do not. Ancient armies continue shaping the modern world in ways most people rarely notice. Their weapons rusted away long ago, their banners collapsed into dust, their kings and generals became fragments of memory mixed with myth. Yet the systems they developed, logistics, discipline, engineering, psychological warfare, propaganda, frontier defense, military bureaucracy remain embedded deeply inside later civilizations. This is the final and perhaps strangest truth about ancient military power. No army truly disappears completely. The Roman legion becomes one of the clearest examples of military legacy extending far beyond the lifespan of the empire itself. Later, European states study Roman organization obsessively. Military manuals survive through medieval copying traditions. Engineers continue admiring Roman roads, camps, and fortifications centuries after the Western Empire collapses. Even the idea of professional standing armies owes much to systems refined in antiquity. Earlier tribal warfare often relies on temporary mobilization, but empires like Assyria, Persia, Rome, and several Chinese dynasties demonstrate the effectiveness of permanent military institutions supported by taxation, administration, and infrastructure. Modern states inherit these principles almost unconsciously. The same applies to logistics. Ancient commanders understand a reality that remains true today. Armies move on supply systems, grain, water, roads, pack animals, storage depots, and communication networks determine victory as much as battlefield skill. Alexander's campaigns, Roman expansion, Persian administration, and Chinese canal systems all reveal early mastery of military logistics on an enormous scale. What survives in the historical record suggests the strongest ancient armies are rarely those with the fiercest warriors alone. They are the ones capable of feeding, moving, organizing, and replacing soldiers over long periods. This lesson echoes through centuries of warfare afterward. Psychological warfare also leaves deep inheritance. Assyrian terror tactics, Roman displays of punishment, Mongol intimidation campaigns, and carefully staged triumphs all reveal sophisticated understanding of perception. Fear weakens resistance before combat begins. Reputation itself becomes strategic weaponry. Modern propaganda states refine these methods technologically, but the core principles are ancient. Even frontier systems carry echoes from antiquity. Walls, forts, patrol routes, buffer zones, and military colonies appear repeatedly across civilizations separated by vast distances. The Great Wall in China, Roman limes along imperial borders, Persian royal roads, and fortified Assyrian provinces all reflect the same enduring challenge: how does a state secure territory larger than any single army can physically occupy at once? There is no perfect answer, and that uncertainty still shapes geopolitics now. One lesser-known continuity appears in military engineering traditions. Roman bridges, siege ramps, fortified camps, and road systems influence later engineering culture for centuries. Ancient Chinese defensive construction techniques shape later frontier systems across East Asia. Naval traditions from Phoenician and Greek worlds spread across Mediterranean civilizations long after the original power's decline. Knowledge migrates alongside conquest. Sometimes former enemies become the guardians of military traditions they once feared. Germanic kingdoms inherit Roman administrative and military practices after the empire fractures in the West. Islamic empires absorb Persian and Byzantine systems while transforming them into new forms. Steppe cavalry tactics spread across Eurasia through repeated interaction between nomadic and settled societies. Ancient warfare is not isolated history. It is cumulative adaptation. And yet there's another legacy far darker beneath the surface. The ancient world proves repeatedly how easily civilizations normalize permanent militarization once survival and expansion become linked together. Sparta restructures society around warfare entirely. Assyria builds imperial identity through conquest and intimidation. Rome transforms military success into political legitimacy. Countless rulers discover that fear, external enemies, and military glory can unify populations temporarily, even while draining societies slowly from within. Scholars still debate how much warfare itself drives the rise of complex civilization versus emerging as a consequence of it. The evidence remains incomplete because early human history survives only in fragments. But what becomes unmistakable across thousands of years is this organised violence scales upward alongside administration, agriculture, and state power. The more sophisticated civilizations become, the more sophisticated their armies often become as well. And the human cost follows the same pattern. Ancient military systems create roads, trade networks, cultural exchange, and political stability across huge regions. They also produce massacres, forced migration, slavery, famine, ecological destruction, and generational trauma. The same Roman roads admired for engineering brilliance helped move conquering armies and extracted wealth. Persian administrative networks support both diplomacy and imperial control. Chinese frontier systems protect populations while consuming enormous human labour. Military power is never neutral. Archaeology continues uncovering this contradiction everywhere. Beneath imperial monuments lie mass graves. Beneath triumphant inscriptions lie burned cities and displaced peoples. Every empire remembers its victories more easily than its victims, and yet people continue building armies. Because ancient societies also understand something unavoidable about the world they inhabit. Trade routes require protection. Borders attract raiders. Rival states compete constantly. Climate stress and migration trigger conflict unpredictably. The refusal to organise military force can leave civilizations vulnerable to those who do. This tension never fully disappears. Perhaps that is why stories of ancient armies remain so compelling now. They are not merely tales of distant violence. They are reflections of recurring human patterns, ambition, fear, adaptation, endurance, collapse, and survival. The Spartans marching in silence toward impossible odds, the Assyrians surrounding cities with engines of terror, the cavalry riders vanishing into steppe horizons, the Roman engineers building roads through forests and mountains, the exhausted soldiers of Alexander refusing to march farther east. Each army emerges from different landscapes and beliefs, yet all confront the same limits eventually. Distance, nature, time. No civilization escapes them forever. And when the armies finally disappear, the earth closes over them slowly, fortresses crumble into hills, roads fade beneath grass, weapons sink into rivers, names vanish from memory, but traces remain scattered across deserts, jungles, mountains, and forgotten battlefields waiting to be uncovered again. A spearhead beneath a farmer's field, a line of buried walls beneath a modern city, a skeleton still carrying the scars of a battle no written history remembers anymore. The armies fade. The echoes do not. The wind moves quietly now across ruins once filled with marching soldiers. Grass grows through the stones of abandoned fortresses where sentries once watched distant frontiers for signs of attack. Rivers flow past battlefields whose names disappeared centuries ago. In deserts, fragments of armour lie buried beneath shifting sand. Deep inside forests, collapsed walls remain hidden under roots and moss, while birds nest where towers once stood. Most ancient armies vanish so completely that only fragments survive. A rusted sword, a cracked road, a line in a damaged chronicle copied by someone who never witnessed the events themselves. Yet for all their disappearance, these armies shaped the world in ways still impossible to fully measure. They redirected migrations, destroyed kingdoms, spread languages, built roads, moved technologies, and forced civilizations into contact with one another across enormous distances. Some created temporary peace through overwhelming force, others left only scars, and almost all of them believed, at least for a time, that their power would endure forever. That illusion appears again and again throughout history. Empires rise with astonishing confidence. Their armies seem invincible while victories continue accumulating. Borders expand outward, monuments grow larger, rulers describe themselves as chosen by gods, protected by destiny, or born to rule eternally. Then slowly, often invisibly at first, the weakening begins, harvests fail, supplies stretch too thin, rivals adapt, soldiers grow tired, roads decay. Generals turn against each other, and the systems that once looked permanent begin breaking apart piece by piece. The ruins left behind can feel strangely quiet compared to the violence that created them. Standing among the remains of ancient walls today, it becomes difficult to imagine the noise those places once contained, the hammering of siege engines, the movement of cavalry, shouted commands in lost languages, fires burning through crowded streets while frightened civilians searched desperately for escape. But the silence matters too, because silence is often the final stage of empire. Nature returns gradually, forests swallow roads, sand covers cities, earth buries weapons beside the people who carried them. Over centuries, memory itself erodes until entire civilizations survive only as scattered myths or unexplained ruins. And still, traces endure. The outlines of Roman camps visible from the air, arrowheads embedded in ancient bone, defensive walls stretching across mountains, the remains of soldiers who marched believing they were changing history forever. In many ways, they were right. Ancient armies are gone, but the patterns they created still linger across the modern world in borders, institutions, military traditions, and the enduring human belief that power can impose order on uncertainty. For a while, sometimes it can, but time eventually reaches every empire, every fortress becomes a ruin, every road fades, every army marches, in the end, into silence.